The London rain hammered against the Ashworth mansion's window panes, mirroring the despair that had consumed Evangeline since she overheard her parents' conversation in the library. Her trembling hands gripped the sill as she watched carriages being prepared in the wet courtyard. Her stepmother's cruel words, questioning which prestigious family would accept such an aberration, still echoed in her ears. Evangeline instinctively touched her deformed back, hidden beneath layers of carefully sewn fabric meant to conceal her condition. At 20, she had resigned herself to a spinster's fate, tending to the family library and remaining in the shadows during social events. But now, an opportunity had arisen, or rather, a nightmare disguised as salvation. Lord Alexandru Dracul, a Romanian nobleman of mysterious origin, had made an unusual proposal to Evangeline's father. He desired an English wife of good lineage, offering in return a sum that would settle all the Ashworth family's debts. The peculiar detail was that he had never appeared in person to make the offer, sending only his lawyer with a letter sealed in black wax. Her father had expressed evident relief, remarking that no normal man would want her anyway, and this Lord Dracul, rumored to be eccentric, might not even care about her imperfections. Now, as tears blurred her vision, Evangeline watched the servants load her modest trousseau. In 2 hours, she would depart for Transylvania, for an arranged marriage with a man she had never seen, who, according to servant rumors, inhabited a gloomy castle in the Carpathian Mountains. Martha, her maid, gently called her name, holding a simple wedding veil, devoid of the elaborate embroidery a truly beloved daughter would receive. Martha's tone, though kind, carried a hint of pity, suggesting even the maid felt sorry for her fate. As Evangeline descended the stairs, each step echoing like a sentence, she wondered what kind of man would accept a wife sight unseen. The obvious answer terrified her. Only someone with secrets as dark as her own. In the carriage, as London faded into the mist, she clutched the small Bible Martha had placed in her hands, recalling Martha's whispered words, "For protection, dear," a tone that implied Martha knew more about Lord Dracul than she let on. The journey would be long, across the English Channel, through France, Austria, until reaching the mysterious lands of Transylvania. Yet what truly terrified Evangeline was not the distance or the unknown awaiting her, but the strange sensation that, for the first time in her life, she was going home. 3 weeks later, Evangeline's carriage laboriously climbed the winding roads of the Carpathians. The thin, cold air bit at her lungs as she watched, through the small window, the dense forest that seemed to close around the road like possessive fingers. The castle emerged at dusk, a Gothic apparition against the violet sky. Pointed towers pierced the low clouds, and arched windows lit up one by one with a golden light that should have been welcoming but somehow intensified the atmosphere of mystery. When the carriage finally stopped in the time-worn stone courtyard, Evangeline felt her hands tremble, not just from the cold. A tall, pale servant opened the door, offering her his hand with a reverence she had never received in her life. He informed her, with a heavy accent, that his master awaited her in the main hall. The castle's interior surprised her. She had expected to find medieval ruins, but instead encountered refined decor that blended ancient elements with touches of modern elegance. Rich tapestries covered the stone walls, and crystal chandeliers provided soft, warm lighting. Her footsteps echoed down the long corridor until they reached a pair of double doors carved with symbols she did not recognize. The servant opened them, and Evangeline entered a majestic hall dominated by a crackling fireplace. There, she saw him. Lord Alexandru Dracul stood with his back to her, gazing into the fire, yet his presence dominated the room. He was tall, broad-shouldered beneath a black velvet coat, with dark hair that touched his collar. When he slowly turned to face her, Evangeline felt the air escape her lungs. He was devastatingly handsome, with aristocratic features carved like a classical sculpture. His skin was pale as marble, his eyes an intense blue that seemed to glow in the firelight. But there was something more, an aura of ancient power, of knowledge that transcended time. He greeted her, his voice like dark honey over velvet, and approached with fluid, almost feline movements. Evangeline instinctively lowered her head, trying to hide behind her brown hair. But then she felt long, surprisingly warm fingers touch her chin, gently lifting her face so he could see her. Instead of the revulsion or disappointment she expected to find in his eyes, she saw something completely unexpected: fascination. He murmured that she was exactly as he had imagined, a note of reverence in his voice making Evangeline's heart accelerate disconcertingly. She began to warn him about her condition, but he raised a hand to silence her. He explained that her condition was precisely what had drawn him to her, noting that she carried a mark few could see, but he recognized. He perceived her as touched by suffering, shaped by pain, and that, he said, had made her special. He stepped back a few paces, his eyes never leaving hers. He informed her that they would marry the following night, as per their agreement, but wished her to know that she was not there out of charity or a commercial transaction. She was there because he had chosen her. Something in the way he said "chosen" sent a shiver down Evangeline's spine. Part fear, part anticipation. When she whispered why he had chosen her, a smile touched his lips, revealing perfectly white teeth. He told her that she was the only one who could break a curse he had carried for longer than she could imagine. The next morning, Evangeline awoke in a luxurious room that would make any English noble's suite seem modest. Golden silks covered the walls, and a marble fireplace kept the room warm against the mountain chill. What impressed her most was the view from the window, an indoor garden with fountains and rose bushes impossibly blooming in the middle of October. A young, silent maid brought her breakfast and a new dress. Not the thick, shapeless fabrics she used to hide her hunchback, but an elegant, dark blue velvet gown that, miraculously, seemed tailor-made for her. The maid informed her, in careful English, that her master had requested she be shown the library when ready. The castle library left Evangeline breathless. 3 stories of shelves rose to the vaulted ceiling, connected by spiral staircases and delicate walkways. Books in languages she recognized, and others in completely strange alphabets filled every available inch. Alexandru awaited her at a reading table, where dozens of ancient volumes lay open. The morning light streaming through the tall windows created a golden halo around his figure, but Evangeline noticed he avoided the direct rays of the sun. He observed that she appreciated knowledge, not as a question, but as an affirmation. She admitted it was her only refuge, explaining that at home, she spent entire days reading. He completed her thought, saying she was escaping, and shared that he too had sought solace in books during his darker years. He gestured to the open volumes, identifying them as ancient chronicles of the Carpathian region, stories most considered legends, but which documented truths lost to time. Evangeline leaned over an illuminated manuscript and was surprised to recognize some Latin words. She pointed out a passage that seemed to speak of a cursed clan. Alexandru's eyes narrowed with interest, asking if she read Latin. She explained she knew a little, as her tutor had said it would be useful for botanical studies, then blushed, apologizing for what she considered an inappropriate skill for a lady. He contradicted her, saying it was precisely what he had expected, and encouraged her to continue reading. With trembling fingers, Evangeline translated a passage. "And the last child of the lineage shall bear the mark of transformation, until she finds the one whose heart was forged in pain, whose soul knows rejection, and whose love can convert darkness into light." The silence that followed was heavy. Alexandru had moved away to the window, remaining in the shadows. He finally remarked that it was an interesting prophecy, though tension laced his voice. Evangeline, hesitant to use his name, asked why he was showing her this. He turned, and for the first time, she saw vulnerability in his blue eyes. He explained that after their marriage that night, she would be entitled to the full truth, and that he needed her to understand that, regardless of what she discovered about him or his nature, her presence there was no accident. It was destiny. Before Evangeline could ask what he meant by his nature, a distant bell echoed through the castle. Alexandru announced it was time to prepare for the ceremony, his expression having grown somber. He asked Evangeline if she was truly prepared, as after that night, nothing would be the same. She looked at the open books, at the enigmatic man before her, and then at her own hands. hands that had never been kissed, arms that had never been embraced with love. She responded that she was ready to discover who she could become, the most honest answer she had ever given in her life. Dusk brought a thick mist that rose from the valleys like dancing ghosts. Evangeline watched from her room's window as the maid finished arranging her hair in an elegant style she never imagined would suit her. The wedding dress Alexandru had provided was a dream in ivory silk and French lace, with long sleeves that hid her thin arms, and a cut that miraculously, completely disguised her hunchback. When she looked in the Venetian mirror, she barely recognized the woman staring back. The maid sincerely told her how beautiful she looked, adding that her master would be very pleased. A soft knock interrupted them. To Evangeline's surprise, it was Alexandru himself, magnificently dressed in formal black, but with a silver-embroidered vest that caught the light hypnotically. He explained it was a family tradition for the groom to personally escort the bride, offering his arm and asking for the honor. His touch was firm and warm, reassuring in a way she hadn't expected. As they walked through the castle corridors, she noticed they passed rooms she hadn't seen before, halls with ancestral portraits whose eyes seemed to follow them, an armory with ancient swords arranged in ritualistic patterns. She asked if his family had lived there for a long time, trying to break the growing tension. He simply replied, "Centuries," adding that the Dracouls had deep roots in those mountains. They finally arrived at a small but majestic chapel, lit only by candles and torches that cast dancing shadows on the stone walls. An elderly priest awaited them by the altar, but something in his eyes, a mixture of reverence and fear, made Evangeline shiver. The ceremony was conducted in Latin and Romanian, languages she barely understood, but the solemn beauty of the ancient words touched her deeply. When Alexandru held her hands to exchange vows, she felt an electric current run through her body. He spoke his vows in Latin, his voice echoing through the chapel with an intensity that seemed to make the very stones vibrate. When it was time to seal the union with a kiss, Alexandru gently pulled her close. His lips touched hers with surprising tenderness. But for an instant, just an instant, she felt something sharp graze her lower lip. The banquet that followed was intimate, served in the main hall with only a few servants as witnesses. Alexandru ate nothing, only drank from a goblet of red wine that seemed too thick to be ordinary wine. When she commented on his lack of appetite, he smiled mysteriously, explaining he had a particular diet, but encouraged her to enjoy, as everything had been prepared especially for her. As the night progressed, Evangeline noticed that the moon shining through the windows had an unusual reddish hue. The servants whispered among themselves in Romanian, casting nervous glances at the sky. Alexandru, following her gaze, explained it was the blood moon, occurring once a decade in those mountains, with some saying it was when the veil between worlds thinned. When she asked if he believed it, he stared at her with those penetrating blue eyes, stating his belief that this night marked the beginning of a transformation that would change both their lives forever. When the castle bells chimed at midnight, Alexandru rose and offered her his hand. He called her his wife, and something in his tone made her heart race, telling her it was time for her to know all his secrets. Alexandru led Evangeline through corridors she had not yet explored, descending spiral staircases that seemed to plunge into the castle's depths. The air grew colder with each step, carrying a strange, metallic, ancient scent. She asked where they were going, her voice echoing against the damp stone walls. He replied, without turning, that they were going to the heart of the castle, where his family kept its most precious secrets. They finally reached a circular chamber illuminated by crystals that emanated an unnatural bluish light. In the center, a black marble altar was covered with engraved symbols that seemed to pulse with life. Alexandru turned to face her, pain in his eyes. He told her that what he was about to show her would change everything between them, and offered her the choice to leave then, promising to arrange her safe return to England. She studied him for a long moment, then stated that after that day, he was her husband, for better or worse, as they had promised, and asked him to show her. He took a deep, unnecessary breath, as she would later realize. Then, before her eyes, Alexandru transformed. His canines elongated into sharp fangs that gleamed in the crystalline light. His already pale skin became translucent, revealing dark veins beneath. His blue eyes intensified until they seemed like two cold flames, and his nails curved into elegant but deadly claws. He declared himself a vampire, the last of his lineage, cursed 500 years ago to wander those mountains alone. Evangeline should have screamed, should have fled. Instead, she took a step forward. She calmly asked if that was why he had chosen her, because he knew she would understand what it was like to be different. The transformation gradually reversed, but the vulnerability remained in his eyes. He confirmed her thought in part, but added there was more. The prophecy she had read spoke of someone whose love could break the curse, someone who knew rejection, who was forged in pain. She moved even closer, until she was near enough to touch his face, and asked what if her love was not enough. He replied that he would then remain a monster for the rest of eternity. Evangeline studied his face, the lines of suffering, the loneliness of centuries, the desperate hope. She finally told him to show her everything, expressing her desire to understand. What followed was a revelation that lasted hours. Alexandru told her about his transformation during a 15th century war, about the early years of hunger and violence until he learned to control his instincts, and how he built the castle as a refuge, spending decades studying ways to break the curse. He emphasized that he hadn't killed innocents in 2 centuries, having learned to survive in other ways, but admitted that loneliness had been consuming him. When she asked about now, he touched her face with reverence, saying that now, for the first time in 500 years, he had hope. When they finally ascended back to the main floor, dawn was breaking through the windows. Alexandru instinctively recoiled from the light, but Evangeline remained by his side. She asked if the sun didn't kill him. He explained it didn't, but weakened him tremendously, making him almost human during the day. She processed this information, then asked the question that would change everything: what she needed to do to help him break the curse. In the weeks that followed the revelation, Evangeline discovered that living with a vampire was simultaneously terrifying and fascinating. Alexandru was gentle and attentive during the day, when his supernatural strength was diminished, but at night he transformed into something majestic and dangerous. He taught her about his new reality, that mirrors did not reflect his image. She grew accustomed to seeing only her own reflection, that he needed to feed on blood regularly, though never in her presence, and that mystical creatures inhabited the forests around the castle. But the most surprising change was happening to Evangeline herself. It began with vivid dreams, where she saw fragments of Alexandru's past, bloody battles, the night of his transformation, the early years of his curse. Then she began to notice things that had previously gone unnoticed: whispers of servants in distant rooms, subtle changes in the atmosphere that preceded storms, and a strange ability to sense the emotions of those around her. Alexandru murmured one night, observing Evangeline correctly identify which servants were worried about some domestic issue without having spoken to any of them, that it was happening faster than he expected. She asked what was happening to her. He led her to the library, where he had set aside several ancient books. He explained that the prophecy mentioned the chosen one would be transformed by true love, clarifying quickly, seeing her alarmed expression, not into a vampire, but into something more. Together they spent the night studying ancient texts. Evangeline discovered she could understand languages she had never seen before, as if knowledge was awakening in her mind. The book spoke of guardians of light, special women who could channel healing and transformative energies. She pointed to a passage in ancient Greek that she could now read fluently, noting it said that when a guardian awakens her powers through true love, she can purify darkness without destroying it. Alexandru leaned over the book, touching the ancient words, confirming that it meant transforming a vampire back into a mortal without killing him, which was what the prophecy promised. However, not everything was smooth progress. One afternoon, while practicing channeling healing energy into withered garden plants, which instantly bloomed at her touch, Evangeline felt a dark presence observing her. That night, she told Alexandru they were not alone there. He confirmed it with a grim expression, explaining that other vampires knew about the prophecy, and not all of them wanted him to be cured, some viewing his potential humanity as a betrayal of their kind. When she asked about others, he revealed that some wanted to capture her for themselves, believing they could benefit from her powers. It was then that Evangeline fully understood the danger she was in. It wasn't just about breaking a curse, it was about surviving long enough to do so. She determinedly asked him to teach her to defend herself. Alexandru smiled for the first time in days, remarking that she was now thinking like a true guardian. The training began immediately. Alexandru taught Evangeline to channel her growing energy into protective shields and bursts of light that could repel creatures of darkness. They discovered that when she touched Alexandru during their exercises, his vampiric strength intensified instead of diminishing, as if their powers complemented each other. He explained, as they practiced in the inner courtyard under the moonlight, that they were a duality, light and darkness, but not in opposition, rather in harmony. Evangeline delighted in this new version of herself. For the first time in her life, her body was not a source of shame, but of power. Her hunchback had diminished so much it was barely noticeable, and she moved with a grace she had never possessed. But the idyll was brutally interrupted one December night. Evangeline awoke to Alexandru tense beside her, his vampiric senses picking up something she couldn't yet perceive. He grimly announced their arrival. When she asked how many, he replied, 3, ancient vampires, older than me. He quickly rose, donning dark clothes, instructing her to stay in the room, which the servants knew how to seal. Evangeline, feeling power pulse in her veins, refused, rising herself and reminding him they were stronger together, as he himself had said. Before he could protest, the castle windows exploded. 3 figures emerged from the night like nightmare shadows. 2 women and a man, all with the supernatural beauty of vampires, but corrupted by centuries of malevolence. Their eyes glowed red, and their fangs were exposed in cruel smiles. One of the women, a blonde of icy beauty, purred Alexandru's name, noting it had been a long time, and identifying Evangeline as his little mortal. Alexandru placed himself protectively in front of Evangeline, telling Serafina they had no right to be there. The male vampire, a dark-haired aristocratic being, countered that they did. As when one of their own threatened to reveal vampiric secrets to a human, it became their problem. The second woman, a brunette with golden eyes, circled them like a predator, expressing curiosity about this guardian, who supposedly could transform them into weak mortals, suggesting they should study her in detail. It was then that Evangeline felt her anger awaken. Not fear, but pure fury against those who threatened Alexandru. Golden light began to emanate from her skin, growing in intensity until the entire hall was bathed in a supernatural luminescence. Serafina whispered, recoiling, that it was impossible, asking if she was already awakened. Evangeline corrected her, stating she was completely awakened, and declared, her voice echoing with power, that they were not welcome in their home. What followed was a battle like something out of ancient legends. Alexandru fought with the strength and speed of his vampiric nature, while Evangeline discovered she could project shields of light that burned the invading vampires on contact. But the decisive moment came when Serafina managed to grab Evangeline from behind, her claws pressing against her throat. Serafina demanded Alexandru surrender, or Evangeline would die. Instead of surrendering, Evangeline did something that surprised everyone present. She channeled her light directly through Serafina's touch, not to destroy, but to show. For an instant, the vampire saw through Evangeline's eyes, centuries of loneliness, the weight of the curse, but also the possibility of redemption. She saw that the transformation offered was not about weakness, but about choice. Serafina released her, recoiling with wide eyes, asking if Evangeline could truly give them the chance to choose their nature. Evangeline simply replied that she could, but only for those who genuinely desired change. The confrontation ended unexpectedly, with the 3 vampires departing in silence, but not before Serafina whispered that others would come, and not all would be so reasonable. When they were alone, Alexandru held Evangeline in his arms, marveling. He told her she hadn't just defended herself. She had offered them hope. When she asked what now, he replied that now they knew she was ready for the final ritual. Preparation for the ritual required weeks of meticulous study and planning. Evangeline discovered that the process would not just be about breaking Alexandru's curse, but about forging a new form of existence for both of them. Alexandru warned her, as they studied ancient texts in the library, that it wouldn't be like fairy tales. The ritual might make him mortal, but she would become something between human and spiritual guardian, immortal but not a vampire. When she asked if they would stay together, he promised forever, kissing her hands, but cautioned about the risks. If something went wrong, he could die, and she could be trapped between worlds. Evangeline had changed so much in recent weeks that she barely recognized herself. Her hunchback had completely disappeared, replaced by an upright, graceful posture. Her skin radiated a subtle luminosity, and her eyes had acquired a depth that reflected ancient knowledge. The castle servants now treated her with reverence, whispering, "Lady of Light," when they thought she wasn't listening. The ritual was scheduled for the new moon night, when the boundary between worlds was weakest. Alexandru spent days preparing the underground chamber, drawing complex circles with blessed salt and ashes of rare herbs. On the eve of the ritual, he showed her 2 small vials, explaining they contained the final ingredients: vampire blood purified by centuries of repentance, indicating one vial with a liquid that glowed with its own light, and tears of a guardian born of true love. Evangeline touched the second empty vial, asking if they were her tears. He confirmed, adding that it didn't matter if they were of joy, fear, or pain, as long as they were true. On the night of the ritual, they descended together into the chamber. Evangeline wore a simple white dress, while Alexandru was dressed in ceremonial clothes of black velvet embroidered with silver symbols. He asked if she was prepared when they reached the center of the ritual circle. In response, she held his hands, reminding him that months ago, she was a rejected woman, hidden in libraries, convinced she would never be loved. Now, she was the wife of an extraordinary man, possessed powers she never dreamed of, and had the chance to give both of them a lifetime of happiness. She wondered how she could not be prepared. The ritual began with Alexandru drinking the contents of the first vial. Immediately, his pale vampiric skin gained a warmer, more human tone, and he knelt in the center of the circle, clearly in pain. He whispered for her tears, asking for them now. Evangeline knelt beside him, channeling all her love, all her hope, and her fears into a single tear that fell into the second vial. The tear glowed like a miniature star. When she poured the contents of the vial over their intertwined hands, the ritual circle exploded in golden light. The transformation was simultaneously beautiful and terrifying. Evangeline felt power flow through her like a current, as she watched Alexandru's vampiric nature gently dissolve and be replaced by restored humanity. But at the height of the ritual, when both were bathed in transformative light, Evangeline heard something that chilled her blood. The sound of footsteps echoing down the chamber stairs. They were not alone. The chamber doors burst open violently, revealing not other vampires, as Evangeline expected, but a group of men dressed in black, wielding silver crosses and vials of holy water. Vampire hunters. Their leader, a middle-aged man with scars on his face, shouted for them to interrupt the ritual, declaring that in the name of the Holy Church, they would not allow this demon to corrupt another innocent soul. Alexandru, still in the midst of his transformation, was too vulnerable to fight. Evangeline felt the power of the ritual fluctuating around them, unfinished and unstable. If interrupted now, Alexandru could be trapped forever between states, neither vampire nor human. She cried for them to stop, placing herself protectively over Alexandru, telling them they didn't understand what they were doing. The leader, with false gentleness, claimed they understood perfectly, stating she had been bewitched by the creature, and they had come to save her. Evangeline declared she didn't need saving. Golden light exploded from her, more intense than anything she had manifested before. She asserted that she had chosen to be there, chosen to love this man, The hunters hesitated before the manifestation of power, but did not retreat. One of them threw holy water towards Alexandru, who cried out in pain as the liquid hit his still transforming skin. Evangeline's voice echoed through the chamber with supernatural authority, demanding they stop. She rose, radiating power, and for the first time since awakening her abilities, allowed her full strength to manifest. The hunters were thrown against the walls by a wave of pure energy, but Evangeline didn't stop there. She approached the leader, who was struggling to get up, and placed her hand on his forehead. She commanded him to see, forcing visions into his mind, memories of Alexandru rejecting violence, protecting innocence, the centuries of repentance and loneliness. The man gasped, his eyes wide, asking if it was impossible, if he had truly changed. Evangeline simply stated that love changes everything. Even monsters can find redemption. But the ritual had been dangerously interrupted. Alexandru was convulsing on the floor, trapped between natures. His skin alternated between vampiric pallor and human warmth, and he appeared to be in agony. She desperately asked what she could do. The hunter leader, still stunned by the visions he had received, pointed to the symbols on the floor. He explained that the circle had been broken, and she needed to complete the ritual with her own strength, but warned it could kill her, as no human was made to channel so much power alone. Evangeline looked at Alexandru, the man who had loved her when she was rejected by everyone, who had transformed her not only physically but spiritually. The choice was not difficult. She declared she would no longer be human, kneeling again in the destroyed circle. She placed her hands on Alexandru's chest and began to channel all the guardian power she possessed directly into him. The light emanating from her was so intense that the hunters had to cover their eyes. Evangeline felt her own humanity dissolving, replaced by something older, more powerful. She was truly becoming immortal. Not a vampire, but an eternal guardian. The process lasted what seemed like hours, but was only minutes. When the light finally subsided, Alexandru opened his eyes, fully human blue eyes, without any trace of his vampiric nature. His voice was hoarse, but completely mortal, as he called her name. She smiled, though she knew she now carried a transformed nature, confirming it had worked, and he was free. The hunters left in silence, clearly shaken by what they had witnessed. Their leader paused at the door only to say, "May God bless you both." But when Evangeline and Alexandru finally ascended from the chamber, they discovered their journey was far from over. The months that followed the ritual brought adjustments neither had fully anticipated. Alexandru, now mortal, had to relearn basic sensations: the true taste of food, the need for sleep, physical vulnerability. But with each human day, he flourished, laughing more easily, finding joy in small pleasures he had forgotten for centuries. Evangeline, on the other hand, discovered the reaches of her new nature. She did not age. Her strength was superhuman when needed, and she could sense supernatural disturbances over many miles. More importantly, she found she could extend Alexandru's longevity through her connection to him, ensuring they would have centuries together. She explained as they walked through the gardens that now bloomed year-round under her influence, that it wasn't vampiric immortality, but extended natural life. He would age, but very slowly. Alexandru, stopping to pick an impossible rose blooming in midwinter, asked if she had no regrets, having given up her humanity for him. Evangeline laughed, the sound echoing like crystal bells, saying she had gained much more than she lost. She gestured to the valley below, where a small village had settled in recent months. People who had heard rumors about the castle where miracles happen, the sick seeking healing, couples needing blessings, travelers needing refuge. She continued that they had become more than just husband and wife. They had become guardians of that place, protectors of those in need. Alexandru pulled her into his arms, marveling at the extraordinary woman she had become. Her hunchback had been only the smallest of her defects. In truth, it was the mark of someone destined for greatness. When he asked about her family in England, Evangeline smiled with a mixture of sadness and peace. She mentioned receiving a letter from her father the previous week, stating that apparently The defective daughter had made such an advantageous marriage that they wanted to visit, noting the irony. When he asked if she would allow it, she replied, "Perhaps, when I am ready to forgive them completely." That night, as they did every night, they ascended to the castle's highest tower to observe the stars. Alexandru had installed a modern telescope, and together they mapped constellations and planned improvements for the castle and the village. Alexandru confessed, pulling her closer, that sometimes he still couldn't believe it was real, having wandered that castle alone for 500 years, convinced he was an abomination destined for eternal solitude. When she asked about now, he replied that now he knew even monsters could find redemption, that true love not only existed, but had the literal power to transform realities. Evangeline smiled, her hands glowing softly as she touched his face. She declared them living proof that no curse is permanent, no deformity is limiting, and no true love is impossible. They kissed under the Carpathian stars, two beings who had found in each other not just love, but completeness. The rejected hunchback had become the guardian of light. The cursed vampire had regained his humanity, and together they created a legacy that would endure for generations. In the valley below, the village slowly grew, nourished by stories of miracles and second chances. Travelers departed carrying tales of the castle where the impossible became possible, where true love had the literal power of transformation. And in the years to come, the legend of Evangeline and Alexandru would spread far beyond the Carpathian Mountains, inspiring others to believe that every lost soul can find redemption, and that true love has the power to rewrite destiny itself. The last hunchbacked daughter had become the first of a new lineage, not of vampires, but of guardians, and their story would be told for centuries as proof that sometimes the most beautiful endings are born from the darkest beginnings.